At this time, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Richard Roberts, Industry Affairs Manager for Honeywell Life Safety and System Sensor. Richard, take it away.
Thank you, David. First off, I'd like to thank everyone for taking time from their busy schedules to attend today's webinar. As David mentioned, I am the Industry Affairs Manager for Honeywell Life Safety and System Sensor, and my main responsibility is to participate on various industry building codes and standards committees. The agenda for today's webinar will be to explain what a mass notification system is, look back at the beginnings of mass notification, look at the types of facilities where mass notification systems are typically installed, review the history and the development of mass notification in NFPA 72, and we'll go through some, not all, of the new requirements relating to mass notification found in the 2010 edition of NFPA 72, which is now called the National Fire Alarm and Signaling Code. I'd like to point out a couple things before we get started. Even though I am employed by Honeywell Life Safety and System Sensor, this webinar is not a sales presentation. Rather, it provides an unbiased introduction into mass notification systems. It's intended to give you a general overview of mass notification and review some of the new code requirements found in the 2010 edition of 72. As David mentioned, this will be the first in a series of webinars on mass notification, with subsequent webinars getting into more of the details and specifics of the new code requirements. So let's get started, and let's look at what a mass notification system is. The concept is relatively new for the life safety community. And it really began from the inability of emergency management personnel to communicate with building occupants during an emergency situation. And if you think of a mass notification system as a gigantic public address system that provides pre-recorded or live voice messages or text messages to personnel over a wide area, it's really misleading. A true mass notification system involves a lot more than loudspeakers and text messaging. The overall purpose of a mass notification system involves an integrated effort to save lives and minimize injuries during emergency situations, such as natural disasters or terrorist attacks. Mass notification can be defined as a technology that provides real-time information to groups of individuals within large buildings, campus settings, entire geographic regions, or globally, such as entire nations. Whether it's a natural disaster, an environmental accident, workplace violence, or terrorist threat, mass notification systems are designed to give emergency first responders a clear understanding of the situation in order for them to take appropriate action, as well as understanding the obstacles and dangers that stand between the building occupants and them getting to safety. So how did all this come about? The concept was developed from an incident that occurred overseas that prompted the U.S. military into developing a comprehensive mass notification program. The incident happened in June of 1996, where a U.S. building in Saudi Arabia was bombed by a truck carrying approximately 5,000 pounds of explosives. The blast ripped the face of the building off, which housed about 2,300 American military personnel. The blast left a crater 85 feet in diameter and 35 feet deep. Tragically, 19 servicemen died and 372 people were injured. This incident caused the U.S. Department of Defense to make rapid changes to its emergency planning by creating the Unified Facilities Criteria document, typically referred to as the UFC, and that was first established in 2002. The UFC document outlines the design, operation, and interfaces required for mass notification systems on military bases within and outside the United States. The current version of the UFC document was published in 2008, and the document is currently in revision cycle and should be published later this year. So since the incident in Saudi Arabia, there have been other high-profile acts of violence and terrorist acts. Everyone remembers the events of 9/11. There have been campus shootings at Virginia Tech University and Northern Illinois University, and most recently, the 2009 Fort Hood military base shooting.
Now, is this UFC only for bases?
It's military criteria.
For many years, mass notification has been installed in U.S. military facilities throughout the world as a result of the Department of Defense's Unified Facilities Criteria document. In the private sector, however, the demand for mass notification systems has been rising steadily since the attacks of September 11, 2001. Mass notification has been and are currently being installed in colleges and universities throughout the country. Mass notification systems can also be used in many commercial, industrial, or governmental occupancies where there is a need to inform or instruct people during an emergency situation.
Everybody stay inside, lock your clothes.
And David, it looks like we're ready for poll question number 1.
We sure do. We do have some background noise I'm hearing, so if you do have your phone, I believe everyone's on mute, but we're hearing some people perhaps bleed through. So if you can, go ahead and mute your phone in case we've missed you. We do have a first poll question, so the poll question is going to pop up on the screen. If you could just click the response that is applicable to you or your business. A simple one to start here. Have you installed or specified a mass notification system? If you could go ahead and vote, we'll leave a few seconds here for everyone that can possibly vote. Appreciate it. We're about 75% or so. We'd love to get over 80. We want to thank you for that. And I'm going to go ahead and close the polls here in a couple seconds. So thank you for voting. I'm going to close the polls, and because we do have such a large audience, we have over 300 people joining us today for this webinar, I want to share the results with you. So it looks, Richard, about almost evenly split. A little bit more, about 54% of the folks have not presently installed or specified a mass notification, probably the reason that they're here, to learn a little bit more about it, and then about 46% have. So I'll take those poll results down. And I do want to remind those that are in our attending audience today, if you do have a question for our presenter, go ahead and use the question icon on the GoToWebinar control panel. Richard, back to you.
Thank you, David. So moving along, how did mass notification get into NFPA 72? The process began in June of 2003 when the Air Force petitioned NFPA to establish a mass notification project. The reason the Air Force did this is because fire detection systems provides an effective platform for mass notification because they are highly regulated, code-driven, and extremely reliable. The rules, testing procedures, and installation requirements of fire alarm systems are already well established and have been for many, many years. Also, after many years of hands-on experience, first responders, fire departments are already very familiar with fire detection equipment and how they operate. Using a fire alarm system as a platform for mass notification systems really results in a high system performance and avoids the additional cost of installing and maintaining multiple systems. Even though launched by the military, mass notification systems are now being driven by industry codes and standards. With the release of the 2007 edition of 72, mass notification first appeared in the annex of the standard. It's important to remember that annex material is not part of the mandatory requirements of an NFPA document. Instead, annex material is included for informational and explanatory purposes only. After the 2007 edition of 72 was published, the NFPA Standards Council created a technical committee to begin work on the development of a new chapter for the 2010 edition. In October of last year, the 2010 edition of 72 was published. In it contains a new chapter, Chapter 24, called Emergency Communication Systems, or more commonly referred to as ECS. The new Chapter 24 ECS system chapter has requirements for an array of systems, including mass notification. Now, calling Chapter 24 Emergency Communication Systems has caused some confusion in the industry. So before we get into the requirements of Chapter 24, let's understand what an emergency communication system is and how it differs from mass notification. A mass notification system is used to provide information and instructions to people in buildings or other spaces using voice messages, visible signals, text messaging, graphics, or other communication methods. A mass notification system is somewhat familiar or similar to a fire alarm voice alarm communication system, typically referred to as a fire evac system, but it covers other emergencies other than fire, such as weather alerts, workplace violence, or terrorist threats. Whereas an emergency communication system may consist of several systems, such as a fire alarm system, mass notification, or two-way communication systems, such as firefighter telephone communication system or area of refuge systems. As you can see, the requirements of Chapter 24 apply to communication systems used for emergency purposes, including fire and mass notification. Now, this slide provides a nice illustration of how the new Chapter 24 is laid out. The chapter is organized into 4 sections. The first section on the left, highlighted in yellow, applies to one-way emergency communication systems. The second section, 24.5, that's highlighted in green, addresses two-way in-building emergency communication systems. The third section, highlighted there in orange, covers the information, command, and control equipment of emergency communication systems. The requirements apply to the equipment used to send and receive signals between the protected premise and the central control station. And the last section on the right, highlighted in sort of a purple color, is Section 24.7, and that contains the performance-based design requirements. Unless you're a certified engineer, you really don't want to be concerned with that. You'll be dealing more with the prescriptive requirements found in the other sections. So Chapter 24 outlines the design, installation, and testing requirements for emergency communication systems, including mass notification. Now, for the purposes of this webinar, we will look at sections relating to one-way and two-way communication systems. So let's look at one-way emergency communication systems. They provide information to people in buildings or outdoor areas using audible, visible, or textual means. The first type of system is an in-building fire alarm emergency voice alarm communication system, or typically referred to as a fire evac system. Everybody should be familiar with these requirements as they are obtained from Chapter 6 of the 2007 edition of 72. The second type of building is an in-building mass notification system. In there, the requirements incorporate the mass notification system guidelines from the annex material in the 2007 edition of the standard, and they incorporate them into the body of the 2010 standard, making these requirements mandatory. And the mass notification, in-building mass notification requirements have been correlated with the requirements of the Department of Defense's Unified Facilities Criteria document, or typically referred to as the UFC document. Continuing with the various one-way emergency communication systems, another type of system is a wide area mass notification system. It provides real-time information to people outdoors using large outdoor public address systems. These systems are used in campus or military base style settings. And lastly, there is a distributed recipient mass notification system, typically referred to as a DRUMS. It's intended to communicate directly to targeted individuals or groups of individuals via email or text. These people may be in a building, a group of buildings across an entire geographic area, or worldwide. It's important to note that these systems are not to be used in lieu of the required audible and visible notification appliances, but they need to be integrated into a mass notification system whenever possible. Now, shifting gears, let's look at two-way emergency communication systems. They give emergency first responders the ability to directly communicate with each other and to building occupants. These systems are an excellent way for emergency first responders to provide instructions to each other, as well as telling building occupants that need help, that may need help, that help is on the way. The most common type of two-way system is a wired firefighter telephone system. Many of you may have installed these in the past and probably are very familiar with them. And you know, these type of firefighter telephone systems are typically found in high-rise buildings such as hotels, office buildings, and apartment buildings. However, in recent years, fire departments are using radios to communicate with each other instead of the wired telephone systems. And these types of systems are referred to as a two-way radio system. And the last type of two-way system is a area of refuge system. This type of system is where people who are unable of self-rescue can safely wait and communicate with the emergency personnel during an evacuation or other emergency situations. These areas are typically located in stairwells or near exits. And David, Can't believe it, but looks like we're ready for poll question number 2.
All right, thank you, Richard. And we do have a couple of questions that have been posted by our attendees, so if it's okay with you, Richard, after the poll question, we'll go ahead and get to those questions. The next poll question is really designed for those that are not actively involved in specifying mass notifications. But if you are, actively involved, go ahead and click the No Barrier Exists response. So what's your biggest barrier to installing or specifying mass notifications? About half of you have indicated that you're not actively involved with this segment of the marketplace. So is it learning the code requirements like Richard's going through today, or maybe just a lack of knowledge on mass notification? Maybe there's no local demand or funding for systems. Is it an engineering resource? Perhaps you don't have the engineering resources to be able to accomplish it. Again, that no barrier exists would be for those that are actively involved. And then if it's something else, something we didn't put up on the screen, go ahead and click Other. I see about 70% of you have voted. I'll wait a few more seconds. Hopefully we can get most of you to participate in this polling, and then we'll get to some of your questions. All right, we're just at 85%, so thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and just because we do have a large audience with us today, I just want to share the results. So Richard, biggest category is no barrier exists, so people are locked and loaded with knowledge and code, knowing the code requirements and engineering specs. Second is that no funding or no local demand, so maybe they're in a market area that isn't quite requiring mass notification or emergency communications yet. And then the third category is perhaps why they're here today, learning that code requirements and having a better understanding of mass notification. Richard, are you open to answer a couple questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, the first one is, are there any building codes, actually they say model building codes, that require the installation of mass notification systems?
Excellent question. The model building codes are typically your I codes, or your International Building Code, International Fire Code, International Mechanical Code, and they all fall under the International Code Council. And right now there are no requirements, to my knowledge, in these I codes that require the mandatory installation of an emergency communication system or a mass notification system. There may be some local municipalities that have requirements, and obviously if anyone on today's webinar are aware of any of these local requirements, we would certainly like to know what municipalities are requiring them. So, please feel free to, send us an email on that. I do know that, there may be some states that's currently in the revision cycle of their state building code they're considering incorporating mass notification requirements into facilities or occupancies such as education. Don't want to mention what states they are right now because it's really not finalized yet, but there is one or two states that are considering it at this point. But as it relates to the model building codes, the I codes, to my knowledge, there's nothing in them at this time.
Okay, all right. Second question is what drives the requirements for either an emergency communication system or a mass notification system? So an either or, and then they ask a follow-up, is it NFPA 101 Life Safety Code?
Well, certainly what drives it is that you want to protect people in an emergency situation. And, NFPA 72, that standard does not require or dictate when a fire alarm system is installed, or now, we're talking about mass notification. That would be in, your respective state or model building codes. And NFPA 101 is a building code, and that becomes effective and enforceable when a municipality or a state adopts it. And at this time, as I said, to my knowledge, there's nothing being proposed for the I codes, or there's no requirements at this time being proposed for the mandatory installation of mass notification or emergency communication systems in NFPA 101. But this is just my opinion. I would imagine in the upcoming code cycles or revisions that may be coming, but at this time there's nothing.
Okay, all right. Here's a rather specific question, and perhaps you might know the answer to this. An attendee is asking about SCIF applications, and does System Sensor provide a solution for this application? Would you know an answer to that, Richard, or should we get back to this attendee
I think
offline?
we probably need to get back to, get back to the person on that. Certainly, it doesn't ring a bell to me at this time, but we can certainly research it and get back.
Okay, very good. The next question is, if a system is used for other purposes than fire, is a separate visual signal required, and is it required under the Americans with Disability Act?
That's an excellent question, and I will probably defer that because later in this webinar we'll get into that. But
okay, all right. So we'll answer
just
that
as
later.
a general overview, you can use combined systems, and as it relates to visible notification appliances, the new Chapter 24 has specific requirements in there, and we're going to cover some of them later in today's webinar.
Okay, all right. Just the last question for this session, Richard. Would their attendees? It's more of a rhetorical question, perhaps, but would one of the barriers be if local municipalities are requiring separate or individual mass notifications that might be different from national requirements? Are you seeing that happening in the marketplace?
I have not seen that, and as I said, obviously to keep up on all the various municipalities throughout the country is a difficult task, and they may have local requirements there, and if anybody is aware of these requirements, please let us know.
Okay.
But nothing to my knowledge at this time.
And when in doubt, check with the local ASJ, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to take the poll results down, Richard, and we'll go back to your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Now we're going to begin really getting into some of the requirements in the 2010 edition of the standard. And really a very important concept that you'll see, and it's a thread going through today's webinar as well as in the 2010 edition of 72, and it relates to performing a risk analysis for in-building mass notification systems. And that's because every facility is unique and has specific risks. A facility's stakeholders must clearly understand the potential risks to their facility and design a system that accounts for them. The key to understanding and defining these risks is to perform a risk analysis before designing and installing the system. The risk analysis will determine the level of system survivability, establish the priorities of the system, and in particular the voice messages, identify where intelligible voice messages are required, and it'll determine the notification zones within a building. Chapter 24 is very explicit about requiring a risk analysis for each facility and each system. As you can see, Section 24.4.221 points out that each mass notification system shall be designed for the specific nature and anticipated risk. And Section 24.4.222 requires the system designer to consider both fire and non-fire emergencies when determining risk tolerances for survivability of the system. And you'll note that there's an asterisk by the top section there. And an asterisk is used in NFPA documents, and it denotes that there is additional explanatory and informational material in the annex of the code. And I highly recommend that you refer to this annex material as often as possible, because it really contains a wealth of information, such as some of the background on why this requirement is in the code and why the committee decided to do what they did. So use that. It's a great resource. Okay, getting back to talking about risk analysis, Section 24.4.224 requires the risk analysis to be used as a basis for the development of the emergency response plan. And Section 24.4.2.3 requires the emergency response plan to be developed in accordance with two key NFPA standards. They are NFPA 1600 and NFPA 1620. The takeaway on these last two slides is that every mass notification system is unique, and there is not a one-size-fits-all solution. Now we're going to talk about system survivability. Needless to say, it's imperative that a mass notification system continues to function during an emergency. Chapter 24 does not require a certain level of system survivability. Instead, it requires the system designer to use the risk analysis to determine the survivability level, and survivability levels are defined in Chapter 12. These two sections give the system designer very clear direction. Section 24.351 directs the designer to Section 12.5 for the survivability levels. Section 24.355 permits in-building mass notification systems to have a level 0 or greater if determined by the risk analysis. So let's start looking at the different survivability levels outlined and described in Chapter 12. System designers often assume if conductors are installed in a conduit that the system is survivable. However, conductors installed in conduit are mechanically protected, but they are not protected from fire. Therefore, the survivability levels in Chapter 12 are based on the system's ability to survive a fire. So let's look at a Level 1 rating, which is found in Section 12.4.2, and it requires the building to be fully protected by an automatic sprinkler system and requires the system conductors to be installed in metal raceways. A Level 2 rating does not require the building to be fully sprinklered. It does require the system conductors to be either circuit integrity cable or be installed in a 2-hour fire-rated assembly. A Level 3 rating requires the building to be fully protected by an automatic fire sprinkler system and requires the system conductors to be either circuit integrity or be installed in a fire-rated assembly. And as you can see, a Level 3 is probably the highest survivability level that a system can have, and it really has a huge impact on how the system is designed and laid out and installed. Let's switch gears here and talk about the priority levels of a system and the voice messages. And this is an area of considerable confusion and misinformation, such as when is a mass notification permitted, or is it permitted to override a fire alarm system. These two sections are very clear that the risk analysis determines the priority of the mass notification message. Section 24.4.210 states the system priority levels shall be established on the basis of the risk analysis, and Section 24.4.216.1 is clear that the priority of the mass notification messages shall be established using the risk analysis. Now, these two sections permit the mass notification system to override the fire alarm system, but only where approved by the risk analysis. And of course, the takeaway here is the mass notification system is not always permitted to override the fire alarm system. Only when it is determined by the risk analysis will a mass notification system be permitted to override the fire alarm system. Okay, the issue of voice intelligibility has been a topic of hot debate, not only for the 2010 edition of NFPA 72, but for many, many years. The code has, for many years, required fire alarm voice evac systems to have intelligibility, but it never mandated a specific level of intelligibility or a method of measuring the actual intelligibility. With the overall purpose of a mass notification system to save lives and minimize injuries during emergency situations, it's really imperative for groups of individuals within buildings or campus settings or military bases to clearly understand the voice message. The 2010 edition of 72 has incorporated into the body of the standard specific levels of intelligibility and methods for measuring intelligibility. During today's webinar, we'll not get into the details of laying out an intelligible voice system. Instead, we'll point out how intelligibility is required, and let's take a quick look at several sections relating to voice intelligibility. Here, Section 24.3.1 requires ECS systems to be capable of reproducing live or pre-recorded message with intelligibility in accordance with Chapter 18. Section 18.4.10.1 requires the system designer to identify acoustically distinguishable spaces during the planning and designing of an emergency communication system. And Section 18.4.10.2 says that each acoustically distinguishable space, or the acronym that's commonly used is ADS, it says that each ADS may or may not require voice intelligibility. The takeaway here is that not all areas of a building are required to have voice intelligibility. System designers must establish which spaces or areas of a building, if any, require voice intelligibility. The requirements for voice intelligibility on the previous page use the term acoustically distinguishable spaces. This is a new term in the 2010 edition of 72, and it came out of the research conducted by the Fire Protection Research Foundation on how to design and measure intelligibility. So what is an acoustically distinguishable space? Section 332, which is in the definition section of the standard, allows buildings to be divided into definable spaces so that the system designer can identify which spaces in a building may require voice intelligibility. So by dividing the building into acoustically distinguishable spaces, the system designer is able to decide through the risk analysis which spaces of a building require voice intelligibility. And as mentioned, not all spaces of a building are required to have voice intelligibility. Not all areas of a building are required to have other notification appliances such as horns or strobes. And these sections point out that the risk analysis will determine when and where notification appliances will be installed. And we're ready for another poll question, David.
You bet. This is our third poll question and final poll question of this webinar, and we will be answering a couple of your questions after this poll question. So in the market area that you serve, what types of facilities are requiring the installation of mass notification systems? So Richard has mentioned a couple. Education and government have come to mind. There may be others. Or are you in that situation where, because of no user demand or funding, no facilities are making this requirement at this time? So if you could go ahead and click on the response or responses that are most applicable to you or your business, we would appreciate it. And again, thinking of in the market area you serve. So if you're a city or a national player, you can answer it in that context. So about 70% of you have voted. We'd love to get that a little bit higher. Leave it open for a couple more seconds. All right, we're approaching the 80%, so we do appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And again, because we do have such a large audience with us today, I'll go ahead and share those results back with you. Looks like, Richard, that government, specifically the military side of the government, so military bases and compounds that are housing our men and women in uniform, are the most common. And then also looks like second is no facilities are making that requirement. And then third is education. So about what we think it would be. Richard, there is a couple questions here. There's a common question that's asked by several of the attendees. Who typically performs the risk assessment or risk analysis, rather?
That is an excellent question. And that is the stakeholders in the facility. That would be you know, the engineer that's designing the system, could be the installing contractor, of course the local authority, and then the personnel of the facility. You know, the fire safety personnel of a university, or the people that's responsible for fire safety and safety of the military personnel on a base. So, you know, you really got to go back to the emergency response plan and the 2 NFPA documents, and in there it'll, you know, lay out who these stakeholders are. And it could vary from, you know, facility to facility, but it's just, you know, these systems are not designed and laid out in a vacuum like, you know, the fire alarm systems back in the 1970s and 80s and even 90s. You know, they're highly complex systems, and it requires a lot of stakeholder input.
Okay. Next question is a comment from an attendee that will turn into a question, because a couple people have asked another question along these lines. And the statement is the requirements for LED displays seem to be anything but unified. So could you shed some light on how the codes or standards are treating LED display signs?
There is a specific section in the standard, Chapter 24, that deals with other types of visible, you know, communication notification appliances. And if, you know, the respondents would like to send an email, I could certainly, you know, send those sections and those requirements. But, you know, today we're just sort of covering the voice intelligibility, and we will be getting into the strobe requirements. But there are other types of visible notification appliances that can be used, such as, you know, graphics or LED types of appliances. But
okay.
Excellent
All right,
question.
Another attendee asks, are we aware of any specific studies that have been conducted on wide area mass notifications and how they've been evaluated for intelligibility, either outdoors or on a military base? Any studies available that you're aware of?
Not specific studies. I could be wrong on that, but certainly, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, that when it relates to voice intelligibility, the Fire Protection Research Foundation has a study that looked into intelligibility and mass notification systems, and that report can be found on the NFPA website, and I would recommend that they go and try to get that study off the NFPA website. And within that study, it may reference other studies specific to the question.
Okay, all right. Another attendee asks, what government agencies are really driving the mass notification systems, and are there other agencies outside of the military that are requiring mass notification systems at this time?
The agencies within the government obviously is the military. There may be other local municipalities that are considering incorporating mass notification systems in public transit type of facilities. But outside of the military, the most common, of course, is universities and campus-style settings. As I mentioned, previously, there's been several just horrific, unfortunate acts of violence. At the University of Virginia, Northern Illinois University, and then the Columbine High School. But the outside the military, the biggest drivers or specifiers of mass notification is colleges and universities.
Okay, all right. So probably Department of Defense within the federal government,
Yep.
and then individual
Right.
colleges and universities. Okay, good. The question here is, must a notification zone for mass notification be the same as the fire alarm voice evac zone?
It certainly could be used as the same, and the speakers could be used as well. But Chapter 24 permits the public address system to be used for mass notification messages, which could include fire alarm messages. But Chapter 24 requires this to be determined by the risk analysis, and the combined system must meet the performance requirements of a fire alarm system.
Okay, good. Richard, does a typical, let me back up here. Does the type of equipment installed for mass notification vary from standard voice evac system?
Excellent question, and right now there is under development a product safety standard for the control and communication units used for mass notification. This standard will be the UL standard 2572, and it will really mirror the UL 864 requirements for fire alarm control panels. This new standard is, as I said, currently under development and is expected to be finalized probably this year, with an effective date of 2012 or maybe 2013.
Richard, we do have a definition of SCIFF to the question that was asked earlier. And unfortunately, System Sensor does not have a product solution for this, but the SCIFF application is basically a speaker that cannot be used as a microphone, and our marketing manager is saying that this is mostly for use in government applications that have perhaps a high security concern or a high security limit. It's really a specially typed device, And the other comment is most standard fire alarm speakers can be used as a microphone. So it looks like it's more of a lockdown type speaker than what is typically available in the market.
Yeah, I know that that's a big requirement in Canada. Yeah, it's not a unfortunately, I guess System Sensor doesn't have a product there. So.
Yep. A couple of attendees have asked if this webinar will be available either via PowerPoint or an archive online. We do plan to archive it online at systemsensor.com/training under the webinar link at our training site, and it should be up in about 3 days. So we won't make a PowerPoint available, but we do have the archive, which is a Windows Media Player file available. So Richard, why don't we go back to your presentation, and we have a couple more questions that we can wrap up with at the end.
Okay. Talking about strobes, I'd mentioned it earlier, and this has been an area of some confusion and misinformation, such as, what marking is required for strobes used for mass notification, what is the lens color of the strobes, can the same strobe be used for mass notification and fire alarm systems, and are strobes required to be synchronized? So looking at some sections here regarding the marking of the face of the strobe, Section 24.4.2.20.3 requires strobes used for mass notification systems to have the word alert stamped or imprinted on the appliance and be visible to the public. The color of the strobe lens has been a topic of considerable debate. In fact, at least 2 branches of the military require amber-colored strobes. However, the NFPA Technical Committee, when they were working on the 2010 edition of the standard, found that amber-colored strobes may conflict with other strobe alerting appliances in some industrial type of applications. Therefore, the technical committee decided that the same strobe used for both mass notification and fire alarm notification shall be clear or white. However, if the risk analysis determines that colored strobes are required, Chapter 24 has specific requirements. Such as strobes with colored lenses shall be marked with a listed effective intensity using the strobe colored lens installed in it. And the intensity of the strobe shall meet the requirements of Chapter 18, and Chapter 18 really deals with the fire alarm notification appliances. So basically, the strobes that are colored shall have the same Candela rating as fire alarm strobes. And strobes used for mass notification shall be listed to an applicable product safety standard, such as ANSI UL 1971. And this is the product standard that fire alarm strobes are listed and labeled to. And finally, Section 24.4.2.20.10 states strobes used for mass notification shall meet the synchronization requirements of Section 18.5, which those will be the same synchronization requirements that fire alarm systems adhere to. So I think that will get us close to the end of today's webinar, but again, to point out, this is the first in a series of webinars dealing with emergency communication systems, mass notification systems, and I believe the next webinar will really get into the more of the specifics as it relates to intelligibility. And just look for that announcement coming out, and I think that it'll provide provide a lot more information than what was presented here today, and today's webinar was really intended to just give a general overview of mass notification systems.
Good. Richard, we do have a couple minutes left and a couple questions here that we'd like to get answered. First of all, you do see our email addresses, richardroberts@systemsensor.com, if you have specific questions for him. Richard, there's a couple questions on voice intelligibility. How is it checked or evaluated, and are there devices or meters on the market for checking voice intelligibility?
You know, the whole concept of voice intelligibility is highly complex and involved, and you know, there are requirements and guidance in the 2010 edition of 72 that talks about that, and I believe that you know, the webinar coming up here shortly by System Sensor will really provide the information on how that is accomplished. But as I said earlier, the Fire Protection Research Foundation conducted a study that you know, just really gets into the details of this, and you know, defines how it's to be tested for intelligibility.
Okay. Perhaps this is our final question, and those we do have a couple that are still pending, and we will get back to you specifically on those one-on-one. But the question covers your strobe coverage, Richard. And how can a strobe that's required to be marked alert for mass notification systems also be used for fire when most fire codes require that to be marked with fire? Well, it's again, it's going to be determined by the risk analysis, but if you use a combined strobe for mass notification and fire, you know, it has to say alert on it. You know, NFPA 72 is pretty specific that a strobe that has the marking on fire cannot be used for anything else but fire. So, you know, if the system designer, after doing these risk analysis, determines that they're going to combine, you know, the mass notification and the fire alarm using one system, they can use the same strobe, but when they do that, it must say alert on it. Okay. All right. Thank you. We are at the top of the hour, and we do appreciate you attending today, and we do appreciate your time as well. So on behalf of System Sensor, I want to thank you for joining us today. As a follow-up, we will be sending you a brief survey in about an hour, and we would appreciate your help in filling that out. That link will also contain the link that we'll have for the webinars site. So if you're interested in the Intelligibility webinar, you can click on systemsensor.com/webinars and sign up for that. That's available at the end of the month on March 30th and 31st. If you do fill out the survey that's in the email, we do plan to reward one of you with a $50 Target card. So we appreciate your help in filling that out. And thank you for